Welcome everyone to the Cardano Effect podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to take high-level developer information and projects that are occurring within the Cardano space and break them down into bite-sized, consumable pieces of information for everyday use. I'm your host, Philippe, and let's get this podcast started. Rick and myself are the hosts of the Cardano Effect podcast. We'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today. We know these are trying times, and we hope that everyone is staying safe. Please consider hitting that subscribe button, like and share our content. We are trying to provide engaging and exciting content for you week by week. So please help us spread this program as far as possible. We have a very special guest who Rick will be announcing very shortly. So without further ado, please remember that none of what we say in this podcast is financial advice. You are your best financial advisor. And if you don't think you are, you need to find someone who's qualified to do so. Rick, how are you doing this morning? What's going on? What's happening?
Hey, I'm doing good, Philippe. Thanks for asking. I'm getting a little bit of cabin fever with the self-isolation, so that's going okay. I would like to give a shout out to the Cardano Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Thank you, Cardano Foundation, very much for your support. And I would also like to remind any viewers who are new to this podcast that this podcast is available on all major audio streaming platforms, so that if you're driving in your car or working out, you can get this podcast on audio. Now on to our guest, Mr. Casey Monroe. He is the Senior Community Engagement and Strategy Lead at the Cardano Foundation. He's lived in many different places throughout the United States and has worked as a community engagement in many other fields, to include Toyota, Google, Zynga, and Wowhead, where he built, grew, and supported communities for more than a decade. So Casey comes to Cardano with lots of experience behind him. So Casey, how are you doing today? Where are you calling in from, and how's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm calling from my home, like everybody sort of is at this point. So we're honestly very lucky at the foundation because we're all set up for remote work to begin with. So there wasn't a big transition period when people started getting asked to stay in at home. So it's it's definitely wearing on my son though, who hasn't been able to go to preschool for about 2.5 weeks now. That's he's starting to get a little antsy. But yeah, we're calling in from Southern California, my home for many years. I'm living now in the Orange County area, which is actually it's actually been kind of a struggle at the foundation because so much of our teams are located either in Europe or in Asia, which means that I'm in this sort of like weird intermediate time zone between the two of them, where I get like the only way I've been able to make it work so far has been having like overlap meetings in the early morning with the team in Europe, and then overlap meetings in the late evening with the team in Asia. And then you have the middle of the day where it's just sort of like, I don't know, maybe I'll take an hour or two off for lunch and like spend some time with my family because I got to go back to work this evening.
Yeah, so there are some pros and cons to the whole working from home and working different time zones. And we see that sometimes with the podcast and setting up times with our guests. But fortunately for the three of us on this particular podcast, all three of us are in the United States. But we have had some with Sebastian over in Japan and some professors over in Europe. And finding a good time frame can be difficult. Bless you. Bless you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to ruin your recording already.
No, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Everyone's self-isolating, and I had to go through a little questionnaire this morning. I had 8 questions. If you have a cough, you have a sneeze, and all that kind of stuff. It was like a risk assessment questionnaire before you go do anything. So most of the United States is on a heavy lockdown. The governors are putting out where and when and who should be on lockdown, which is pretty much everyone now. So I think that's a good risk assessment for people to be doing. But we're glad to have you on a podcast today. And so the first thing that we would like to know is what do you do as the senior community engagement and strategy lead? What is the general idea of that job? What keeps you busy all day?
So, officially, the easiest way to explain it is that I'm in charge of the community management team. That means if you're listening to the podcast, you probably know at least some of the people that I've been working with. Niels, aka Katsumoto, has been part of the team for forever, and Andy Hendricks is part of my team. But also, Ryan Hay on the Chinese side, we just brought on board Tiago, who is in Portugal and who's working with the team to do sort of project management on the stuff that the community team is working on. we have like if you've ever done any work with Ben O'Hanlon or anybody else on the team, Tommy, who runs entertainment and is doing a lot of work directly with the ambassadors and the stake pool operators. These are all sort of nominally funnel up to me. But all these people have, with the exception of Tiago, is almost as new as I am. But all of these people have been doing their work, for 6 months to a year at this point, and we didn't really have somebody who, until I came on board, who was responsible for making sure that everybody was kind of running in the same direction. And it's actually been kind of fascinating to step into a role like that, because I've done work in previous companies where I had to, I was brought on board to build a team, where I would decide which roles we needed to fill, and then bring in, interview and try and find people that made sense to fill them. But this is the first time I've ever, done that same sort of process in reverse. And it's been really interesting, because there are struggles with it, but there are also a lot of advantages, because it shows that the foundation, it shows their investment in the idea of trying to approach every problem and question from the bottom up rather than from the top down, because rather than bringing in somebody from an authoritarian perspective to say hey, this is how we're going to do things. Here's who we need to hire. We're going to hire X, Y, and Z. Here's who it's going to be. It was let's make sure that before anything, we have good people sitting in the positions that directly deal with the community, that communicate with people, that are the ones with their ears to the ground, working with people every day. And once we have those people, it's better to have those people and have nobody to manage them for a while than it is to try and just have somebody who, from a management perspective, might be less familiar with the community and might make mistakes early on that you could avoid if that person, when they came in, had a team who was just sort of no, let me tell you, here's the relationships that we have with these people. Here's what the community is upset about. Here's what they're excited about. Here's what they're waiting for. So having those relationships when I came into this role, rather than trying to build a team from scratch that and learn it on the fly, has been tremendously helpful.
Okay.
A lot of the and sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. But a lot of the officially what I'm doing is managing that team. And we had before I came in, we had Pakit Azimkhanov, who's very talented, but his focus and his desired focus has been much more on the sort of marketing and corporate communications side of things. So he wound up working with the community team kind of out of necessity, because they didn't have somebody who had more community experience in that role. So when they brought me in, the most important thing that I've been trying to take on is basically saying, we have a really talented team of people doing, work in the community right now. And they didn't have every single person on the team would have an idea on how to solve a problem and would come up with a proposal and would send it on up. But if you don't have anybody, if it's something that requires the whole community team to work together, and there's nobody whose job it is to say yes, this is the way that we're going to do this particular task. This is the tool that we're going to use, or whatever it might be. Then if there's nobody who has the ability to say yes, okay, we're all in agreement. We're going to go do it this way. That proposal is the one that we're going to work with. Let's all go ahead on that route. So you wind up with a lot of frustrated people, because it's I know what the problem is. I have an idea for how to fix the problem. I recommended my idea, and then kind of nothing happened, because even if everybody agrees that it's a good idea, then there was nobody felt comfortable in the role of saying yep, that idea is the right one. Let's move ahead with that one.
All right, good. Yeah, because you got to develop some sort of focus and direction for the team as a manager, as a community team lead. Have you found that there are any experiences you had at Google, Zynga, and Toyota that have translated over to Cardano Foundation? It's kind of helped you with building that direction that the community team is going?
Yeah, it's been one of the things that the foundation did when that we talked about a lot when I came on board was that we have a lot of people in our community team who came from the Cardano community, who came and who come from a technical background, who really know the crypto space really well, who really know the Cardano specific community really well in a lot of cases. But a lot of them are learning community management as they go, and that's it's kind of inevitable because there's not really. It's hard to find sort of an agreed upon set of like best practices in community management as an industry. Like they exist, but I think. I've sort of from my personal perspective, my biggest frustration with community management as an industry is that we don't do very good job of talking to each other. And my theory is that it's because we're talking to people as our day job. So nobody, when you get to the end of the day and you're doing like your own personal development and growth work, nobody wants to be just talking to large online communities anymore because that's what they do all day. But we don't communicate with each other very well. So there's not a very good, there's not like an established on-roading path or a clear, way to develop your skills. Like there's a couple of conferences, but if you want to learn to be a community manager, really the only option that's available right now, even now still after it's been, in industry for 10 years, is just to kind of start working with communities and figure it out. And the only way to get, to sort of prevent yourself from landing in these pitfalls and making these big sort of early mistakes that kind of every community manager is subjected to, is to be under the tutelage, so to speak, of somebody who has already made those mistakes. So you mentioned when I started at wowhead.com, and I don't know how big the overlap is between World of Warcraft players and people in the crypto community. Like, I don't know if either of you two got addicted to World of Warcraft in like the mid 2000s, like everybody I knew did. But
I didn't play WoW. But Rick, you were playing WoW?
No, I got addicted to Elder Scrolls, Skyrim. Not as much name calling in those. As WoW.
Well, there's not, like, if you're doing a good job managing your community, there's not a lot of name calling in World of Warcraft either. But what I worked for was a site called Wowhead, and Wowhead was when World of Warcraft initially kind of reached popularity. It was still kind of in the early days of the internet. Broadband internet was kind of just becoming a thing. It was 2004, 2005. And it was just sort of reaching ubiquity. And what it meant was persistent world, always online gaming services were still kind of new. And they sort of wound up pioneering a lot of that and making it sort of more normal to have a persistent world that you could log into. But what it meant was that World of Warcraft was just huge. There was so much in there. And the game did not do a very good job of holding your hand to tell you where to go and what to do. And the quest descriptions were vague and stuff like that. But you couldn't have a strategy guide because at that point, if you had that problem, you went to your GameStop or whatever it is, and you bought a printed strategy guide and you read it. And World of Warcraft would change. It was first of all, it was too big, so it would be like a phone book. But also, it was just constantly changing, and so you couldn't have a printed version didn't work. You had to have something that was online. You had to have a database that was searchable and that would update as changes happened. And that was the service that Wowhead offered. It was a searchable database of all these different quests and items and all that sort of thing. But it also had absolutely no community features whatsoever. When I joined the team, it had comments, I guess, on the pages, and that was it. And they had nobody doing any sort of community work. It was an in-house project with just two developers who were both still in college at the time. And the website got purchased by the company that I worked for, and the company I worked for basically said, we want to have somebody who's working with these people directly to make sure that we have a good visibility into what the community wants. We're developing features that people like and all that sort of thing. So we want to take somebody non-technical whose goal it is to to get to know the people who use this website and make sure that we know what they want and figure it out. And they just kind of like shoved me into the into this website and said, like, good luck, like, figure it out, buddy. And Wowhead at its peak had almost like 9 million people using the website, and it was just me. So it was an absolute, just a complete trash fire, like making every possible mistake, because I had no guidance on what to do, except for, like, I don't know, seems like people might like if we did this. And if I had somebody who had more experience at that point, I could have avoided a lot of mistakes. So there are a lot of people, to keep from getting too sidetracked, there are a lot of people who are in the foundation right now who are in that same sort of phase of their career, who are really talented people in terms of like how to work with communities and know this space really well, just like I knew MMOs very well. But what they didn't have is they didn't have somebody who had made all of those mistakes to warn them, like, maybe don't do it this way, do it the other way, because mistakes you make from a community management perspective are, you frequently don't see the consequences for them for a long time. So having somebody in the role of somebody whose focus was not necessarily on Cardano, whose background was not necessarily in Cardano, not even in, like, my background's not even really in crypto. Like, I have, I've been sort of like bumped up against that space for a while. Got to know, like, in my work when I was doing MMOs, I got to know a lot of people who were trying to get into the real money trading space, and a lot of those people like wound up, holding Bitcoins about 5 years later. So it's like, I've been sort of like around that space, but I wasn't, in crypto specifically before I came to the foundation. What they were hiring was a career community manager. I've been doing it now for 13 years.
Wow.
Which is like, in a space like community management, that's like, it's a young field. I can name a few people who have been doing it longer than I have, but a lot of them are retired, and the others are, you can count on one hand. So it's a field where there's a lot of best practices that can be learned, but there's not a good path for how to learn them, except to find somebody who has already made those mistakes and have them guide you. So I'm happy to sort of exist in that role for the team here at the foundation.
Yeah, it's good to have you around. There are some things. One thing I found about online communities, one of my favorite parts is when the community develops a certain culture, and Cardano has that culture going. And Elder Scrolls I can compare, but basically my favorite part about Elder Scrolls, similar to WoW, is when the old timers train the new people. Mm-hmm. And that was my favorite part about playing that video game. I haven't played it since the testnet started. But, the people have been around. But the same thing on the testnet. The people that have been working on the testnet for a long period of time are helping train the new people that come along.
That's one of the
good
reasons
community
why,
dynamic.
Yeah, it's kind of the only way for communities to remain viable, because you see a lot of, especially in the gaming space, there's sort of this expectation, like you've seen all the urging, like, don't read the comments, like, there's sort of an expectation that, like, it's inevitable that if you put everybody into, a forum or a comment section, that, like, eventually it's going to spiral into a flame war. And we sort of treat that as a given. And it's frustrating because it's not true. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. You just have to have a community culture that fights against that impression, that way of relating to one another. And you have to have, like, tools that don't, and platforms that don't incentivize people being jerks to each other. Because there's a lot of, like, if you look at a lot of, like, traditional forum structures, there's a lot of, most of them exist to support a product or a service. Like, if you're playing Elder Scrolls, like I don't know if you ever, like, participated in that community, but I'm sure they have a forum. I haven't poked around there much myself, but Skyrim, I'm sure that Skyrim has a forum like on the Bethesda website where people will talk about their experience with the game and will connect with people. And every now and then, I'll bet you, the developers of Skyrim will come and they'll, respond to a thread, or they will post, their patch notes or whatever it is about changes. And everybody in the community will get really excited, and everybody will pile in on that thread. And you'll see the thing that you see sometimes where people are like, "Hey, a developer is here and listening. Like, I'm gonna yell about my pet issue, or the annoyance that even though it has nothing to do with what you came here to talk about. Like, hey, do you have a response about the thing that I'm really excited about?" And you get people sort of pile on. And the reason why this happens is because forums are kind of their own game. Like it's a game with its own incentives and its own way to win. And all that sort of thing. And you win, in most cases, in a community like this, you win by getting attention from the developers. Like that's your score. That's you're getting your score up. You get that, and that's exciting. You want them to look at the things that are concerning to you. But the result is inevitably, there's I can't remember the exact factoid, but there's some common principle in behavioral psychology that people tend to respond more to negative things than to positive things. It takes 5 compliments to outweigh 1 insult, or it's something like that. It's just but people tend to respond more dramatically to a comment on to a positive to a negative comment than to a positive comment. So if you're a developer and and people are posting with the goal of getting developer attention, then it's just human nature that eventually you're going to start responding to criticisms more than you're going to start responding to positivity. And that means that, remember, since the score is how to get people responding to how to get responses from the development team, so people are incentivized to get developer attention with criticism. So after a while, you eventually just have the situation where it's just sort of people are trying to come up with things that are even more critical than they might have been otherwise, just to make sure that maybe if I yell loud enough, they'll call on me. So it's you wind up with people without meaning to. You wind up with a platform that incentivizes people to be angry and critical and frustrated.
Thanks for that response, Casey. It seems like you have a lot of experience within the gaming world as well, and you're using some of that experience to translate to your work at the Cardano Foundation.
That's where I got started. I came from gaming originally, so I've been in sort of tech and consumer products for a while, but gaming is still sort of it's in your blood.
Okay. So the slight difference I see with the Cardano project as opposed to a gaming platform or a video game or anything, a product that's either tangible or service that's tangible, you can use that service or you can go buy a video game and play that game, is Cardano is a little bit different. It's like this thing that exists in this tertiary realm. I mean, cryptocurrency is a lot different from anything tangible. There's nothing, it's very hard. When you explain to the layman person, in layman terms, I purchased ADA, I purchased Cardano. It doesn't have any meaning to anyone because it's not physical. It's a digital currency, and there are issues with that. So when you compare it with traditional stock markets, if you invest in shares of a certain company, you are a shareholder. You have some sort of voice within that stock. You can attend stock meetings and put your votes for who's going to be representing your company on the board. What is the relationship? Is there a similar relationship with the Cardano Foundation and the community? Because all of us here, or majority of the people watching this are, I'm not saying everyone is an ICO investor, but there are probably a few ICO investors that listen to this podcast. But everyone has been investing in this project for quite a long time. And they put a lot of money, into the project. People often give you the financial advice of not to put more money than you can lose. But I would assume that most people put more money than they can afford to lose in this project. So it becomes that much more of an emotional experience. So using that logic, what is the relationship between the investors who actually funded this project to move this project forward and the Cardano Foundation? I don't know if you can elaborate on that.
Well, I think the simplest answer, and I have to before I dive too far in, I have to kind of give the caveat that as as far as the team goes, I am both the close to the newest member of the Cardano Foundation, so I'm the least in touch with the history, and because my background is not in crypto, I want to make sure that I'm don't wind up putting myself in a situation where I wind up saying something embarrassing. But the biggest key difference is that the Cardano as a project is built on the back of it's built on the back of investment, but it's investment in it wasn't Cardano isn't a startup in the traditional sense. Cardano in the an investment that Cardano is built on is research investment. It began as a research project, and Charles has talked about this a little bit in some of his YouTube AMAs and updates. But the general sense is that when people came in, when we had, we were looking when we got started at the beginning, we were pulling together our investment finances, with the goal of building a technology rather than the goal of making a profit. And I give you the caveat because I don't know what the contracts actually said, but I do know the development philosophy of the other members of the team, and ultimately, there is there's an element of investment in in the company, but even company is the wrong word. Foundation's a nonprofit, but there's an investment element. But at the same time, it's an investment that was made to build a new technology that was open source, so that anybody could push that technology forward. And I think especially as we get closer and closer to true decentralization, I think that ultimately there are we're our goal IOHK's goal is to deliver a product. We have a list of specifications on what we want the technology to be at this point. We want it has to sort of meet these requirements. It has to work this way. And once IOHK reaches that point, the product is it becomes an open source gift to the community, to the people who need it, and to the people who work on it, the people who build it, and the people who build on it. And then at that point, it has always been the expectation and the plan that the product owners are going to be the people who use it every day. And that's the whole reason why the Cardano Foundation exists, so that when that initial sort of baseline set of specifications is met, then it's time to say okay, let's hand it over to this nonprofit organization. Because as a nonprofit organization, we can say that we don't have anybody that we need to answer to, except for we need to keep our doors open so that we can continue to drive adoption of the technology, that we can continue to give the Cardano community the things that they need to build on it and to see success using it.
Okay. So this transitions into the next comment, and this is about community relations amongst community members and the Cardano Foundation. I'm not familiar with every single case that's happened, but you can look on Reddit or in Telegram or various different media platforms, social media platforms, even on Twitter. And there are people that are claiming that they're banned from certain platforms for saying certain things. So this whole idea that I believe that certain community members feel like this is an open source project, they should be entitled to free speech. Where's the line? And because we hear also stories of people getting banned or muted for saying certain things, they may be adversarial in nature or pointing out some criticisms with the project, and they're muted either on Reddit or Telegram, wherever the case may be. Can you address these issues?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I was excited to get the chance to sort of talk about, because I know that anytime where you're working with a community team that's in the sort of situation that our team was in before I came on board, where you have 5 or 6 people who are all working together, and they're all smart and well-meaning and want like to do what's best for the community, but because there isn't any sort of established way to reach a consensus within the team, you wind up with a little bit of inconsistency, and that shouldn't reflect badly on the team at all. It's inevitable when you don't have when there isn't a mechanism in place to get everybody sort of moving in the same direction. And one of the things that I wanted to set out to resolve was to try and make sure that we were all approaching this kind of question from the same philosophical like perspective. So you have to when you're one of the things that I've been hassling everybody about has been to say that like when you're a community manager, the first community that you need to work with is internal within your team. It's not like the first step is to make sure that your relationships with the community of other people at the foundation is healthy. And then, you can, once you have that sort of strong basis, then you can engage more directly with the external community in a way that makes more sense. So we've been doing since I came on board, we've been doing a lot of sort of homework in terms of making sure that like we agree as a team, not just on like the letter of the law, but on the spirit. Because so much of community management inevitably winds up kind of being a judgment call, because you're trying to read people for tone. You're trying to, like make every day you're making 1,000 sort of micro decisions about like, what's going to be best for the community, for which members of the community, like, and so on and so forth. So in terms of how the philosophical approach to this works, you see this kind of conflict in almost every online community. There are and some of them have like, some of them are more obviously like, contrived or silly. Like, you constantly see people, complaining about free speech when they get like banned from a forum about like Apple products or whatever it might be, like, because but community managers ultimately have a responsibility in cases like that, especially because those are more authoritarian projects where it's like you do things our way, and then they have a responsibility to make sure that they're keeping the kind of community that they think is the healthiest and the strongest for their project and for their product, because their loyalty is to the company first. Cardano is a little more complicated because the community and the technology, at least the eventual goal is that the community and the technology will eventually be like one and the same. That like the strength of the platform is in the people who are using it. So, but because of that, and because it's an open source project, it's a little more, when somebody says like, like their free speech is being infringed upon, you have to take, claims and concerns about that a little more seriously than you have to do if you're working in, Bethesda, or if you're working at Apple. So it's, we've been talking about this a lot internally to try and make sure that we strike exactly the right balance. And I know there's been some, especially in the last couple of weeks, there's been some specific concerns about the way that we've been handling it. Philosophically, my approach to how communities like this should be handled is that it's more there's nothing that I or any community manager at the foundation can or will or should ever do that will prevent somebody from being part of the network or from contributing to the technology. We don't have there's nothing that I have the power to do that will prevent you from running a stake pool, or that will prevent you from exchanging ADA, or I have, and if there was then that would not just be something I wouldn't do, but also it would be a flaw in the technology. So I have no interest at all in ever asking anybody to leave the Cardano network as a whole. But we also do run a lot of channels that we operate specifically for the purpose of allowing people to talk with one another about the technology, to get help, to to answer questions and concerns. And that's a little different because those are because we operate those channels. as part of the foundation, we have a responsibility for making sure that, in the most like obvious example, like people aren't using those channels to like organize a harassment campaign, like, and that's like an incredibly over the top like example of the kind of thing that can happen, but it is a thing that happens in online community channels from time to time, and you have to be sensitive to. So we have a responsibility to look through those channels and make sure that they're being used, in a constructive way, in a way that's healthy for the people who use it, in a way that's healthy for the technology. Like if people are using, a Telegram channel that we operate to orchestrate an attack that would allow them to take over the Cardano like network, then we're going to put a stop to that, because that's not healthy for the community and it goes against what we wanted this channel to be used for. Again, that's an over the top example, but from there it becomes like, okay, so where are you sort of like trying to divide the line? And as long as we're responsible for those channels, my philosophy is the most important thing that we can do is create a channel that's welcoming to as many different kinds of people and as many different sort of philosophical approaches, like as diverse a set of sort of like intellectual assumptions as we can, to make sure that we are learning from as many different, backgrounds and as many different like types of people. So making sure that those channels stay welcoming is a critical goal for me. And the best and most important way to make sure that those channels stay welcoming is like, hey, you're not allowed to be a jerk. Like, everybody is allowed to like criticize the platform. There is a lot to criticize the platform for. I completely understand. Like, even when I came on board at this, in this company, like I, immediately walked into a situation where it's just sort of like, hey, look, here's this community project that we've been telling people that we were going to do for 9 months already. Like, can you make sure that it gets out the door? Because, people have been waiting for it for a long time. There have been, delays. There have been there's a lot of reasons to be frustrated. And I completely understand. Should be places for you to vent that frustration. It's important. One of the most valuable services that community managers offer to a project is making sure it's obvious to everybody where the pain points are. Like, who is frustrated? What are they frustrated about? Like, how can we address it? Like, acting as that sort of advocate and voice in, the meeting rooms where people are making technology decisions, saying like, hey, just FYI, people are going to hate this. Maybe we should do it a little differently. Like, that's one of the most valuable things that we can offer. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that the frustration that we're hearing is constructive. And there are lots of situations where there are people who either get frustrated to the point where they want to lash out, which is understandable, but you can't do it here, because the whole point of creating this space is to make a space where people can collaborate without being lashed out at. Because when you're building something that's essentially collaborative, like, people need to be like kind to one another, or collaboration like dries up. You can't, work together in a big group if like one guy is over there being a jerk to everyone. Everybody else winds up just sort of being quiet and waiting for him to stop talking, and you get frustrated. And one of the principles of community management that I have developed over the career that I've been building is to remember that your community belongs to the worst people that you will allow to remain in your community. So whoever, and it's the same thing where you see sometimes where it's just sort of like, hey, I'm a white supremacist, but I should be allowed to espouse my white supremacist views in your community channel because that's free speech. And it's just like, okay, but eventually, if you agree that that this is a kind of speech that you're going to tolerate, then anybody who does not want to listen to that kind of speech is going to leave, and you're handing your community to those people. So the worst people in your community are going to end up running things, which means that it's a community manager's job when you own the channel. Like in this case, whether it's Telegram or the forums or whatever it might be, when you own the channel and it's your job to make sure that it's a positive, collaborative, friendly space where people can work together and make something better, then your job is to make sure that like minimum bar of who the worst person that you're going to tolerate in this space is set high. Especially because, and you might remember I mentioned early on that community management mistakes frequently take a long time before it's really clear that a mistake has been made. Because in a lot of cases, when you don't come down hard in situations like that, where people are being jerks to one another and you're not, you're sort of allowing it, then you create a culture in your community where people are encouraged or allowed to be jerks to one another, and it becomes like friendly, like tussling and that sort of thing. But that becomes what your culture is known for. So anybody who does not want to participate in that culture sorts themselves out and finds another place, or they stop engaging with your project altogether, because that's the kind of people that your project appeals to. And eventually you wind up with a community that's just people who want to fight all the time, and everybody who doesn't want to fight is already gone. But that happens like a year later. And at that point, when you realize it's a mistake, you can't just like, oh, we're going to change the code of conduct to say that you're not allowed to fight this way anymore. Because even if you do, all the people, that's what your community is known for. It's like the cultural identity of your community. So if you change that and you start kicking out people who behave in the way that they have been expecting to behave this whole time, then they disappear because you've kicked them out. But there's no like replacements don't just like grow like mushrooms. Like you have to go out and bring those people in, and those people are going to be resistant to coming and joining you because they know that your community is known for that kind of tussle and that kind of fighting. So they're going to be like, I don't really trust you. That's not the kind of community that I wanted to engage with. Yeah. So trying to solve those mistakes later is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And sometimes it requires rebooting things entirely. And that's always a difficult and frustrating process for a community. It's so important to make sure that you're solving those problems early and establishing a culture where, you can look at people who are just being mean, even if it's like, because giving critical feedback without being mean is fine. But if you're being mean about it, even if your points are good, your community needs to be able to say, oh no, sorry, we don't do that here. That's not how we do things.
Yeah. Casey, I am so glad you have this thorough understanding, because that's been like a long pet peeve of mine, of interacting on some of the channels. And I'll give you an example, side-by-side comparison. I was in one Telegram channel, which was not Cardano. It was a different cryptocurrency, and it's just a mess. If you go to the Cardano Telegram channel, you can learn things, you can get help. There's all kinds of good things going on. And if I were to lay these two channels side by side, I left that other channel because that channel was a contest to see who could be the biggest jerk. And the same thing happens on Twitter. I'm just going to call it like I see it. When you look on Twitter, what they call crypto Twitter, and the Ethereum community does it the most. There's a lot of people in Ethereum, and I just call them out because I can. I'm just a regular guy. They have this contest to see who has the bigger brain or who can make the most snide remark on Twitter. And it's almost like a competition. And I'm glad Cardano isn't entirely like that. Now, there are some people in Cardano who kind of get dragged into that mess. And I've had to catch myself before and say, I started getting, and I'm like, nope, take a step back.
Step back.
Don't get dragged into that mess.
How many
don't
times
act like the Ethereum people, because I don't want Cardano to be like that.
How many times have you written like a whole like Twitter reply or comment out, and then like gotten to the end of it and just been like, I'm just going to delete that?
Oh, you busted me. You totally busted me.
Or a Reddit comment, like a 10 paragraph Reddit comment where it's just sort of like, let me tell you all the ways that you're an idiot and you're wrong. And then just gotten to the end of it and just been like, nothing will come from me posting this comment.
Yeah. I'm guilty of that so many times.
Just get drawn in.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. You get dragged into it and then just take a step back. Because I'm a moderator on some of the channels. And I'll tell you another thing that I see. And most of the people know this. We have really good moderators in Cardano, but you'll get the occasional person who thinks that they can say whatever they want, no matter how bad or untrue it is. So they'll write this entire paragraph, and you can see it on the channels, and then they'll caveat at the very end, and they'll say, in the name of freedom of speech or censorship or transparency, and they think that's a magic word that means I can say whatever I want and get away with it. Look, we know those people, those very few people that are doing that, we know what you're doing, okay? You're being childish. The moderators know, we know your game. We know those people that walk right up to the edge of the rules and they push the edge of the rules and without stepping over it, and they think they're getting away with something. They're not. We know who you are. We've seen it. Some of them have been dealt with. Some of them behave better now. But I feel for you, Casey, man. That's a tough job because, what works best? Is it consistency, treating everyone the same, or is it case by case basis, treating each case differently? It's a tough balance, man. It's tough. It's really tough.
Another one of the sort of like philosophical like angles that I take when I'm thinking, it's a very common problem, like for community managers to deal with, especially in smaller communities, to deal with the kind of thing that you're talking about, where you have people who want to like walk as close as they can, like right up to the line, but not cross, because like, and in a lot of cases it becomes a game of, can I like poke holes in your code of conduct? Like, can I demonstrate to you why your whole community management like philosophy and approach is useless anyway? Because look, I have obeyed all of the rules, and look at what a jerk I'm still able to be. Like, you see this happen a lot. I've
seen them over and over again. And we know who they are.
my philosophy on this, I have a test that I apply in situations like this, because it comes up a lot where you're trying to deal with like, you'll find situations where the whole community management team will have to have a conference call to talk about like X member of the community, like a particular name, like an individual person is like causing such frustration and such difficulty, and like the code of conduct maybe doesn't give you like the tools that you need to handle it appropriately, and so it's just like, what are we going to do about so and so? And the minute you have to have that conversation, where you have to have like get your like 6 people on a phone call to be like, what are we going to do about this one member of the community? You do 2 things. You do one, you quickly add up in your head the hourly rates of everybody who is in that meeting, and times like the hour that you had to spend talking about it, and just add that up. And every meeting you have ever had to have to talk about like what you're going to do about this person. And then you add up the approximate like napkin math value of this individual person's contributions, like lifetime contribution to the community, plus like the further contributions you feel like you might lose if they were no longer a part of the community channels that you operate, and you balance the two. And you go like, which one of these is like, how many more of these conversations are we going to have? How much does it cost our foundation every time we have to have one of these conversations? And so far, I still do it every time. I still do the math. But so far, I have not yet encountered the individual contributor who I have had to have one of these conversations about, whose contributions have been so like meaningful that it's like, yeah, you know what? It's worth it. Even if we have to spend another hour in this meeting figuring out exactly how we're going to handle it. Like, yeah, it's still worth it to try and like, make sure that we're keeping the valuable contributions that this person has, especially now in an open source software space, because we're not even talking about cutting off people's contributions to the actual technology. Everybody has the exact same access to the technology that they would have otherwise. Like, we're just talking about their contributions to the community channels that we own and operate. And if your contributions to those channels are not as strong as like, the combined value of all the time we have had to spend worrying about like the ways that you are like disrupting or frustrating the community, then it's probably best if you weren't here. Like, it's not a net positive for the whole, like for the community, that you're the contributions that you're making, walking right up to the line of what's acceptable, like it's probably not worth it. And so we make sure that we have like that it's clear to everybody in the process, to everybody who's being a part of things, that ultimately like the community management team who operates these channels has to do has to make judgment calls in terms of what we think is the best for creating like a positive, nurturing, collaborative environment. Mm-hmm. Because any open source software project is going to live and die on the ability of the members of its community to work together and to build something that everybody agrees is better than they started. And if you don't have the kind of environment where people feel comfortable being vulnerable, where people feel comfortable like offering suggestions that might get shot down, or if you don't feel comfortable and safe in that kind of an environment, then you're not going to be able to contribute, and we're going to lose out on the valuable contributions of a community member just because somebody was being a jerk.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us to the last part here. We're at about the 50-minute mark, so we're approaching. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Time
so
flies.
now it kind of becomes Casey in the hot seat, where Philippe and I get to ask you the tough questions about things that people would like to know more about. And Philippe, I believe you had a few. Would you like to lead off with that part?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to touch on the recent. Well, when you first entered the Cardano Foundation, Bakit released a news article on December 11th, I believe, 2019. And they had a blurb about you and Tiago. And one of the sentences says that basically you're going to be focusing on adoption and use cases and synergies between digital systems and real world human behavior. So the top of everyone's mind as an investor, as a person that's been within the Cardano ecosystem for a long time, is this whole idea of adoption. Adoption maybe is synonymous with partnerships with certain companies or certain projects, but that term is very loose within crypto. It doesn't really mean much to me anymore. I'm a small business owner. I've attended multiple trade shows, industry-specific trade shows over the years, and what you learn is year after year, you start seeing the same people. You collect the same sort of business cards. Your Rolodex fills up, and you have this stack of business cards. But I don't really consider a partnership until actual exchange, monetary exchange, or product exchange, or service exchange is happening between party A and party B. So when we hear about these partnerships for the Cardano project, which is still needs to hit certain milestones, like for example, Shelley Mainnet needs to come out and smart contracts need to come out. What do these mean? Is this? I know that Cardano, in general, the project has been involved in a lot of these trade shows. I'm sure that pretty much everyone in the industry between Monroe, Cardano Foundation, and IOHK. So are these partnerships, is this something that the community can take seriously as to this is going to potentially add value to the Cardano project long term, whether that be through some sort of investment through ADA, or how real are these partnerships? That's basically what I want to say. And what is this an evolving strategy that you're having? Is this going to evolve as certain milestones get hit during the Cardano project?
Yeah, I'll give you the best answer that I can on this one, knowing that that ultimately it's probably not going to be as satisfying as you want. But I can my focus has been almost purely on driving adoption, specifically in the area of trying to figure out ways to get to try and get more developers ready to build for the platform. We have a lot of people who are working in the space of trying to build our partnerships with governments, with corporate groups, with NGOs and all this sort of thing. And I unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of that I can speak to directly, only because it's just not an area where I have a strong understanding of where things are sitting. So that's part of the reason why that answer is going to be unsatisfying, and I'm sorry for that. I can tell you that I had the opportunity to attend a workshop in London a couple of weeks back with a lot of key players from Monroe and from IOHK. And while I don't I came away from that without a whole lot of details on what the sort of the nature of our partners is going to be. I can tell you that I am spent a lot of time working in tech spaces, and I have a lot of confidence in the people that I met in that process to deliver. Ultimately, I know that's not a real answer, and I'm sorry for that. Yeah. I can tell you that in terms of we're trying to talk about, like from the community perspective, like what I'm trying to hit specifically is, we're in the process now of saying like, okay, we've done our sort of audits of what the community team has done like so far, what the community looks like, and who we've got, where our strengths and our weaknesses are, and what information we need that we don't have. And now it's like, okay, we know the what now. We know like where we are. We need to. The next step is like, where do we want to be, and how are we going to get there? And it's taken, unfortunately, like kind of everything from the Cardano's perspective. It's taken longer than we wanted, and in part, like that's just been a spin up process for me. Because there's a lot of background learning that I had to do, a lot of learning needed to be done to make sure that I understand the ways that like the sort of like three organizations like govern themselves. What's my responsibility? What's the responsibility for other people in the team? And making sure that I'm getting to know our community team and building sort of like systems and to processes to make sure that we're all sort of running in the same direction. But I can tell you that I think Charles likes to segment our community into loosely, at least, into 4 groups, and those people are people who want to profit from Cardano, people who want to build on Cardano, people who want to build Cardano, build like the technology itself, and people who want to use it. So basically, you've got sort of speculators. You've got developers who are going to help build the platform. You've got developers who want to use Cardano to build something on the platform, like a smart contract software or something like that. And you have people like business owners and governments and such who need a blockchain solution to make something work. And at this point, the next big push that I want to do for the community is I want to make sure that we're building out our ability to support people who want to build Cardano and people who want to build on it. That's specifically where I want the community team to be focusing, over the next year. And to a certain extent, like we're doing like preparatory work right now because like you mentioned, like Shelly Mainnet hasn't hit. Like there are sandboxes to play in. There's sort of like languages to learn and sort of things to test. But ultimately, we don't really have anything for those developers to really play with yet. Like, a little, but not really. So right now, what it becomes is like, okay, when that release hits, like, are we going to be ready? Are we going to make sure that, because in the ideal world, fingers crossed, people are going to see that release go out the door and say like, oh, here's some new toys. I'm going to try and play with them, try and do something, see if I can use them to do something cool. There are people who are waiting, who are developing on other blockchain platforms who are waiting for Cardano to port over. And when that happens, my goal is to build community platforms and not just platforms and tools, but also to build like a community of people who are there to make sure who have the ability to make sure that developers can do their best work. So making sure that we have good documentation, making sure that like our platforms are in a good spot to help people collaborate. Making sure that even things like taking our more non-technical community members and helping them to skill up a little bit, helping them to read, for example, and interact with GitHub releases so that they can have, even if they're not developing directly, so they can have better visibility and clarity on what actual changes are being made by developers who are building the technology. So yeah. That's been my biggest area of focus when we're talking about driving adoption, when we're talking about the way that platforms synergize with people and so on.
Yeah. Wow, it sounds good. We're approaching the hour mark, so I'm going to roll on to some final questions there. But Casey, I got to hand it to you. You know, Cardano is going to be massive. Philippe and I have been firm believers in that, and we've been pointing that out to people on a regular basis. As Cardano, Goguen, Basho, Voltaire, as those roll out, Cardano is going to become massive. And you're going to have a lot of different groups of people, as you just described, that you're going to have to work with. And I'm glad to see we have someone who's not super hyper developer. Like when we first started doing this podcast, everyone was extreme development and research oriented. So I think it's really good now we have people on the team who are focused on the people and not the code. You need a good blend of all these different areas. So the last part I wanted to talk about here, and Philippe, and you can ask your last questions and then take us out, and that is the ambassador program. What can you tell us about the ambassador program? It was starting to go the incentivized route, or there was some talk about it becoming incentivized. So what can you tell us about the ambassador program?
So if people were paying close attention to the Reddit, they may have noticed that this recording slot was originally intended to be a slot specifically where we were coming on to talk to you guys about the ambassador program, and that kind of changed at the last minute. And that's I'm sure it's not the first time that's happened, and we're really sorry. I know that Cardano's strongest selling point, I think, is in their ability to do things carefully and deliberately, and as such, to keep themselves from making mistakes that are going to turn out to not be sustainable in the future. But also that means like things go slowly and there are delays, and it's easy to see that the community has been patient with us through a lot of those. In terms of the ambassador program specifically, that's like obviously you also have the situations with Shelley going live like later than we had originally intended, but like the ambassador program is kind of a microcosm of that same sort of problem.
Yeah.
A lot of it came from like there's been a lot of delay. A lot of that delay comes from the fact that there wasn't anybody in, because we had this sort of like bottom up management structure. So we had people who were building these like really cool, like processes and systems that we could use to do really cool stuff for ambassadors. And then they would because there wasn't somebody in sort of the spot that I currently occupy, they would get handed up to people who maybe didn't necessarily have as much of an intimate relationship with the community as the community managers, and who didn't feel comfortable like signing off on a process like that, especially if there wasn't it wasn't clear that consensus had been established between the community team. So that, like it wasn't one team, it was 6 people trying to do the same sort of tasks. So like a lot of that initial delay came from there, and then and as soon as I came on board, like the first thing that I was told was just sort of like, this is one of the things you're going to be asked to deliver. It's already very late. Just FYI, like you might want to get started.
Yeah.
And so much of that has been pushed back by just like the homework that I needed to do in terms of making sure that we're building processes so that the people on the team can communicate with each other, even just figuring out what our task management is going to look like. So all of it has taken much longer than we intended, and I'm really sorry about that. At this point, a good chunk of that is my fault. But what I can tell you is that our targeted launch dates are like, we're talking about days or weeks. Like I don't want to give somebody a day and then slip again, because like we've been doing that for ages and I hate to disappoint, but we're looking in the days or weeks, like, period at this point.
So we're specific.
Close. We are extremely close.
Okay. Because people have been waiting on this for like just like Shelley, 2018, 2019. Now it's 2020. Yeah. Same thing on a Cardano ambassador. I'm glad you have ownership of the process, but we are close.
Yes,
but we don't want to announce an announcement, right? Are you going to announce an announcement?
Exactly. So what I've spent just to give you some context, I've spent the last like week and a half giving like proofreading and giving like final approval on every individual piece of documentation and text change that is going to go out like when this program launches. And as far as I know, as of this morning, that's all done. So it's just like any day now. But there's still one or two big open questions, and it's and they're like, can we get all of our ducks in a row from a technical and a legal perspective to do this the way that we really, really want to do it? Or do we have to launch with like something that's like not quite what we wanted to do, but we really need to get something out there and we're going to get it fixed in the next like couple of months to be like what we always imagined it to be? And because of that, we're in the process right now where it's like we're trying to get a final answer on like how long these little last minute like shifts and changes are going to take. And the question is basically, are they going to take like 5 days, 10 days, maybe? Because if that's the case, then we'll wait. Well, we can wait 10 days to get it like just absolutely right. But if it's going to take a month, then like we're going to launch it as, in the like 85+% state that it's currently in. And we'll run, and it's been our intent from the beginning to run this as a pilot program. Like it's supposed to be like, the development of systems like this is always supposed to be iterative. You're supposed to like bring something out, let people chew on it, take it apart, and then try it again. We've even done this already with like a select group of ambassadors who have piloted like the original plan for the program that we had existed when I came on board, and we had to make some corrections because what we found out was that we were offering incentives and rewards based on like an individual category, because each of our ambassadors are belong to one category or another. There'll be a moderator, or there'll be a translator or a content creator of whatever it might be, and we were incentivizing and rewarding people for performing in these categories. And we sort of test piloted it with a small group of ambassadors, and very quickly found that all the people that we really want to reward and really want to do well are contributing in like a bunch of different areas, that it's not just and that we wound up, without meaning to, we wound up incentivizing them to drop their other like areas of focus and just do one thing. And that's not, that doesn't create a good program, but also like it's not fun. Like the people who really want to do this are doing this because they're excited about the project and they want to contribute in all these different ways. And we basically had to go back and say, like, we don't have a mechanism for incentivizing and rewarding this behavior that we want so much. So we had to go back and make changes. And and those changes are now like ready to go. But it's always been the intent that when we launch, even once we do like official wide launch that everybody is like, a part of and anybody can be a part of, it's always going to be like, okay, this is what it's going to look like for 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, like we're probably going to change a bunch of things because ultimately the process of like, sending a system, whether it's software or a program like this out into the wild, is you interact with the human element, and all of your assumptions go out the window, and you go, oh, now I have to go back and do things in a different way because I want to make sure that I'm building a system that creates the results that we wanted, that makes people happy. So regardless, I can tell you that the system that we're launching in the next like days or weeks is going to be a pilot program, and we're going to be gathering as much learning as we can from that, and we're going to be making changes over the next 3 months to finalize and get it into a place that we're really excited about. And we're waiting on like some final tidbits of information in terms of like, is what kind of legal documentation we need to do the things that we want to do. Because as soon as like actual like finances are changing hands, you got to make sure that like, all your ducks are in a row, and what the actual, how the actual like incentives and reward structures are going to look. And as soon as we have an answer on whether or not we'll be able to do that in like a reasonable time frame, then we'll be ready to launch. It's just a matter of like, if we can do this exactly the way we want to in the next 5 or 10 days, then we will. And if it's going to take, a month, then we're going to give you guys what we have and iterate throughout the pilot.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for that information, Casey. I appreciate it. So I would like to offer that once you have that finalized, and it sounds like it's very shortly, to come back on the Cardano Effect to tell everybody about that program. Sound good?
I'm very excited to do that. I want to make sure that we're bringing in Tiago as well, because he has been an absolute rock star in terms of just making sure that everything is tracked, that we're not missing anything, that everybody is on task, and that like, we have a lot of great idea people, and Tiago is great at delivery and execution, and he's been an absolute lifesaver. So I'd love to come back and have him on as well, so that we can talk a little bit about the details of the program once we're ready.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd like to have him on as well. And Philippe, let's take us out.
All right. Thank you so much, Casey, for joining us. You are welcome anytime. We learned a lot in this episode. We learned all about community management, what you're doing at the Cardano Foundation. It seems like you're really setting the bar high and pushing this community forward. So we appreciate you and we appreciate the team. So with that, we are over our hour. So let us sign out. Casey, do you have any last words for the listeners and the viewers of the Cardano Effect podcast?
Only to say thank you guys very much for having me on board. I really appreciate your time, even though I went a little over. And also that I'm really excited about the possibilities of this project. We're not just driving the blockchain space forward. We're driving the community space forward, and we're creating new ways for people to build things together. And I couldn't be more excited.
All right. Thank you so much, Casey. And until the next episode of the Cardano Effect podcast. Bye, everyone.